University, I also took my intro to CS course under Professor. And he's a visiting prof and research affiliate at MIT and MIT Sloan. He earned his PhD from Yale and works on cryptography and secure computation and privacy. He also advises on organizations on cybersecurity. I'll hand it over to him. Thank you, Prof.
All right, people can hear me? Mic's working? Fantastic. All right, so let's get started. Thank you for that very kind introduction. Downside of this panel, I was looking at the introductions I have of the people. If I read everything out, we'd be here for the entire hour. I was just counting the number of times the word prize or award appeared, and it's like 63 or something. So there's not really any point. All of the introductions are by definition going to be incomplete, and I'll go through that in just a moment. But let me first talk a little bit about why we want to have this panel. So Sandeep and I went back, and so he suggested the title, and I was immediately, this is great. This is what we should go for. And I want to motivate the story of this a little bit, right? Especially in the context of a developing country like India, where we're having this discussion, right? And the issue is like this. In a lot of places across the world, a lot of R&D is done in collaboration with industry, and things work out. Sometimes they don't, but people understand. In the place where we are currently situated, that kind of engagement has kind of been missing, right? A lot of the research that occurs is, even when it is sponsored by industry, is kind of lip service. It is very, very regimented, and you really don't see the kind of interesting work that one sees in many other places. That's not to say that the other places are necessarily doing it right, but certainly there's more of it, right? And even talking from personal experience, just working with startups and large companies alike, there's been a lot of expectation mismatches. There's been a lot of issues with things like timelines. That is not, by the way, to say that, let's say, the Indian government is an easy partner to work with. That has its own troubles. But it is certainly the case that working with industry in an industry-academia sort of partnership presents its own set of challenges. So we have a stellar cast of people who are going to talk about some of their experiences, and we're going to see what sort of the standard failure modes are in these situations. As I was talking with someone just before this, we're going to talk about some cases where they, for example, gut feeling thought this is definitely going to work, and it just didn't, right? What are the barriers? Is it the way money is spent? Is it expectations around quarterly reports? Is it something else? Because it is certainly the case that, you know, when we worked on certain projects and we know that, oh, you know, this quarterly meeting is a total waste of time. You know, I have to convince my PhD student and a couple of my RAs to set aside some amount of their time to make the stupid presentation. I don't want to do it. The other side doesn't want to hear it. We're all playing this game, right? So with that question out there, what are the right things to do? What goes wrong? And what are the inefficiencies in the system? Let me go around the two tables and introduce the folks here. I will also, because by definition I'm not going to be able to do full introductions, I will also ask that the first time you all speak, feel free to add to the intro that I've produced, because I've sort of ad hoc chopped off pieces of the official introductions that I had. So let me first introduce Dr. Gautam Shroff, who's been heading TCS research for quite a while. He's been with TCS research since 1998. And he's been doing some very, very interesting work. He's been associated with Ashoka as well before. So a couple of you may have had classes with him. And one of the interesting things that I found is this lovely line at the end of his bio, which says his current research interests are analogical reasoning, machine learning for finance, and tools for accelerating research, right? So I might poke you about the tools for accelerating research bit a little bit later. Let me then introduce Arko Chaterjee. He is a director at Bains, where he co-founded and leads BCN Labs, which is an R&D think tank working on, and here's why he's in this panel, combining industry best practices with the best of academia. And there's a bunch of corporate buzzwords after that about scalable, customizable stuff, but we'll see how he can back those up. He's an alumnus of IIT Bombay, and he's done a master's degree as well, so he's sort of seen both sides, just like Dr. Shroff. Let me then go on to Ashish Gupta, who's had a long association with Ashoka and Plaksha as well. He's the founder and CEO of Benori, which is a global research, data insights, knowledge solutions type firm. And he's been in the industry for many, many decades, where he's one of those McKinsey past masters, and he's founded multiple companies, including EvalueServe, and he's also from the IIT group, in this case IIT Delhi, and we'll be talking about his experiences in dealing with academia, both from an semi-administrative perspective, as sort of creating academic systems as well as being part of these things. And of course, he too has a bunch of higher degrees from the stellar cast of places, in this case, Carnegie Mellon and Harvard. Let me now introduce Professor Glynn. And you're the person who's responsible for the awards overflow, I think, in my list. So I'm just not going to mention that he's gotten any awards. As far as everyone in this room is concerned, he's never won anything. Okay, but he's the Thomas Ford Professor in the Department of Management Science and Engineering at Stanford University, and he has done absolutely everything from what I can tell. And I want to just also hone in on his interests right at the end of it, saying his research interests lie in simulation, computational probability, queuing theory, statistical inference for stochastic processes, and stochastic modeling. I'll just mention one very interesting thing when I ask him his first question a little bit later about his background. Let me then move on to our last but not least panelist. The least is standing up, that's why. The others have nice seats. Mine was just replaced. Ashish Goel is a professor of management science and engineering by courtesy at computer science at Stanford University. He's also a member of Stanford's Institute for Computational and Mathematical Engineering, and his research interests lie in the design, analysis, and applications of algorithms. You should write a book with that title. Current applications, current areas of interest: social networks, participatory democracy, internet commerce, and large-scale data processing. Whew. Okay, now that we've gone past the introductions, I have a set of questions officially that I have, and I'll run through some of them. But really, I want to do this very, very organically. I don't want to get stuck with specific things, and I'm not going to stop you just because you're in the middle of something and we need to move on to the next question. That's not how this is going to work. But I will encourage everyone to do two things. Number one, we have a limited amount of time, so be brief. This applies to the panelists and more so to any questions that are more of a comment from the audience. And especially, I want to think about, I would love any comments that talk about failures. Because everyone loves talking about successes when we look at industry, academia, partnerships, and things of that variety. You know, you Google it, there'll be a list of successful ventures or things people claim are successful ventures that occurred. So understanding the failure modes is really important and is not something that is well discussed beyond just hand-waving, oh, it's hard to do, right? So let me start with, yeah?
Can you just say a little bit of the profile of the audience? Who all do we have in the audience so that we can tailor-make our comments accordingly?
Sure. So most of the folks are, most of the people here are going to be students, right? They are very talented students, and that's why, and they're definitely well motivated. That's why they're attending this conference, but mainly students. Yeah. So these are people sort of looking at future careers, perhaps straddling both sides of the story, which is why many of them, I hope, will be interested. So I know you sat down randomly, but such is fate. So I'll start with Professor Shroff. And if you could just check that the sound's working on that.
Yeah,
yep, fantastic. So whenever we discuss something, it's always good to set the goalposts, which is what does success look like and what does failure look like? So in your experience, when you worked with or seen industry-academia partnerships, what are some of the sort of repeated patterns you saw in the projects that ended up succeeding? What does a successful project, when you look at a proposal, look like? What do you look for?
Good question. I was head of thesis research. Now I'm retired, and I'm a professor, but technically retired. So what I think if there's one singular indicator of failure in all my experience, we funded millions of dollars of research around the world, in India and abroad. The one common factor of failures is you start with an MOU and it stops at the MOU. The MOU is great for the institute administration to say brownie points. I got MOU with 20 industries, and the universities can go and tell the government that we got so much industry collaboration, and hopefully they won't look too deep into what's actually happening or not happening. Right? What succeeds, and the one biggest contributor to success is you guys. When students are involved, things work, and actually I would say that's only the time they work. If only professors and industry work, it also doesn't work. Professors are too busy, industry is too busy. But the student as the anchor in the middle, whether he's an undergraduate or whether he's a postgraduate student, doesn't matter. That student is interested because he has a career to build, he or she has a career to build. So that is important. They can get involved as PhD students. In the US and other countries, it's more often PhD students. Here we don't have that many for whatever reason, for many reasons, as you'll discuss, I'm sure. But undergraduates here are great because they are the ones who become the PhD students later, and getting them involved is important. One of the most fruitful collaborations I've had is with BITS Goa. We had a program where undergraduates would do internships as a part of their curriculum for credit with TCS, with a co-advisor from BITS, someone from computer science, somebody from biology, there were 2 or 3 profs involved. And that was most fruitful, produced excellent research papers. These people went to Stanford, etc., as grad students. Plus, much of the work actually got into the product side or the delivery side, because it was taken up by our side, engineered and put together other things and went. So when students are involved, and therefore when I retired, I set up a platform called ICAP Internships. The idea was that startups and companies would offer projects, undergrads, others would apply, they would do them either for credit or as internships, and they would get evaluated properly, not just throwing a CV. So that it's on Google, you can see that a startup I work with recently just hired 2 full-time and 2 part-time interns on the platform, and they only had to see probably 12 of them. All the other assessment was done automatically through AI. So I think students are the key. When students are involved, it works. Whether or not money is involved. Money should be used to support collaboration, not be the reason for collaboration. That's what I think.
Very nice quote to end on. So I'll go to Professor Ashish Goel next. You weren't looking. He said something interesting, and I want to pick up on that, and I'll come back to you if you want to add some comments on it. You said, oh, these projects were successful, and then kind of on the side as you were mentally saying, oh, here's why I think they were successful. You said, oh, there were publications, they also worked on this, then the students went on to top colleges. So you provided some metrics, shall we say, for how successful something is. So let me ask you this. When industry and academia are working together, I suspect, so here's my hypothesis, probably they measure success in very different ways. What is your measure of success, and how have you seen these measures differ in the two sides of this industry-academia relationship? You want to pick up the mic? Yeah. Just check it. It's not on, I think. It should be.
So, as an academic, I think the one thing that's super important is for the project to be successful. And I would say a project is successful, and that's very aligned. A project is successful if it gets visibility within the company and it gets implemented within a company. If there's an artifact that you can point to, saying this is what came out of this collaboration, and it's something that, let's say, your collaborator's boss's boss knows about, like a fairly simple metric. Generally, the kind of collaborations that I've been involved in have what I would call boutique collaborations. They're not collaborations at scale. So we're not delivering a lot of students as part of an internship process. It's like a small group, one faculty, one student member, a small group interacting with a small group on the other side. Then the other measure of success is that did this succeed in a way in which I can attribute it. So quite often, people in industry, there are many currencies. The currency in industry is often money and product innovation. The currency in academia, especially for these boutique collaborations, where you're not counting the number of students who got jobs, for example, is academic credit. So the second measure of success is, well, this thing got implemented. Did it get implemented in a way in which I can concretely cite it? Did the CEO make a statement about it in a news article? Is there a co-authored article? Is there a blog post? And I now insist on it. I tell people at the beginning of the collaboration, this is my currency. Yeah? If you implement it, if it's valuable to you, I want credit in a way that's very public. I don't want to be like a certificate of appreciation. I don't want like a bonus. I don't want to be in front of your internal VP being congratulated, because those things I can't take to my department chair, who used to be Peter Glynn, and show it to him, right? But if in one of my collaborations, Dick Costolo, who was the CEO of Twitter, actually gave an interview for a magazine, and he mentioned me for something, and that's a hard currency, and that's my hard currency more than money, and so that's very valuable. And the third measure of success is whether this used ideas which are beyond a textbook idea. It's okay if the thing that got delivered was not cutting edge research. It's okay if it was somebody else's research. It's okay if it was your past research, but it cannot just be engineering. And if it's just engineering, then I feel like while we solve the company's problem, I would not say that we did an academic industry collaboration that really sort of utilized both sides' strengths. Okay. So I think I stuck to your question. So
Yeah. No, that's something very interesting. I especially liked your second point, which is the sort of in econ you have revealed choice. This is like revealed credit. Something is good if it is externally validatable and it's good enough that I want to take credit for it. Right? So I'll sort of chew on that for a bit. I might come back. Do you want to add anything to that in terms of that measure of success, that metric?
No, you see, the measures of success on both sides are different, and I think sometimes they get blurred, especially from the perspective of the university administration and the professors involved. Credit and visibility is important. But for most of the academics in India, it's not important. And it's actually, in my view, a good thing. I think it may be different in different parts of the world, but here people actually want to do decent work, and they want decent publications, and that's their their goal. The industry's goal is they want their groups to be at the cutting edge. They want, when they go to the customer, to be able to confidently say that what they're doing is at the bleeding edge or cutting edge or whatever the industry is like. And perhaps some deliverables that they are giving might or might not have the content being from this research, right? The motivations are clear. When the motivations get blurred, I'll tell you, they get blurred when it comes to IP. The university wants to own IP. What the hell will they do with it? They don't know how to monetize IP. They have to defend it when somebody sues you. So they don't understand these things. From the industry side, they're quite happy at times to give up the IP as long as they don't have to defend it, because we don't know then other side, if you did something wrong and you're liable to be sued, I don't want to be sued. So this is where things get confused. But the motivations are very different to the bottom line. Most academics in India really want to do decent research. They're not that interested in visibility. That's my view. What I've seen. I know it's different. I've seen people at CMU and Yale who are only interested in getting that page in the papers, etc. But in India, it's a bit different.
Okay, interesting. So I'll come to Professor Glynn now, and I'll mention the interesting point. Among his numerous awards, and he's been, I see things of various kinds, outstanding publication awards, things of that variety. I wanted to mention one award because I thought the name was brilliant, from the Winter Simulation Conference, and he is officially a titan of simulation, which I think is an absolutely wonderful title to have.
Within the community, it's often referred to as a Titanic of simulation.
Well, so is the mic on, by the way? Just double check.
Now it is.
So let me ask you. We talked about measures and so on, but let's get on to empirical evidence, right? Which is, we have some theoretical measures, we have some ideas about first principles, and he mentioned something very interesting, that it's not the funding that's the real thing. The funding is supporting the thing. So let me ask you this. In your experience, if you think about the most impactful collaborations, he mentioned his was at BITS Goa, if I'm correct. What motivated it? Was it funding? Was it curiosity? Was it profit? Was it access to data? All of those things can be part of it, but how did it get started? What was the thing that clicked and that led to that most impactful, in your opinion, collaboration that you've had?
Well, maybe I'll just start by saying that at Stanford, there are probably really two different models for what industry-academic collaboration looks like. So one is a model in which it's basically the individual professor, the investigator, interacting with a company. And the second mode is that you have some center, and the center is working with some industry segment, and there are various companies that decide to affiliate with the center. And as a result of that support from industry, there is a pot of money that the center has available to distribute dollars to faculty that are affiliated with the center. And then that's done on some competitive basis within the university, maybe with some membership on the awards committee from the industries involved. So those are two different models. I would say at Stanford that probably there's been a trend over the course of my career that more of the funding now comes in through this center model than through individual interactions with faculty. So going back to your question, I was going to say a bit about some of the most enjoyable industry collaborations that I've had have been in the mode of opportunities that have come to me from companies that wanted some support, some advice on a particular technical problem, where it was obvious that, for example, having a PhD student involved with this would be a very, very useful asset, and that there'd be potentially some interesting thesis level research that could come out of that. That's as distinct from something that, let's say, looks like what would be called a consulting opportunity.
Okay.
Right? So within the Stanford environment, probably many of the faculty in the School of Engineering are also doing consulting outside the university. And that gives you a different way of interacting with industry. And that also, at least in my mind, has had lots of positive impact on the problems that I've thought about over the course of my career, where oftentimes it isn't immediately the case in the consulting environment that you need a more refined research product in order to be able to answer that question. So, but on the other hand, there is some very interesting research question that I'd never thought about before that gets stimulated by the research that I was doing. And that sort of goes on to the top of my list in terms of, gee, this would be fun to do at some future time. So I think it's been quite stimulating over the course of my career, the number of different things that I've gotten involved in thinking about that I probably wouldn't have thought about otherwise, other than through that kind of industrial collaboration.
So let me just poke a little bit on that, because you said something and you implied something and I'm not sure, so I just want to clarify. You talked about the two models.
Yeah.
And then you said
Of course, the context I'm talking about in which you're doing consulting, that's a third mode.
Right, sure. So you have these two standard models and then there's the external consulting. Right. But then you said that the centers model is the one that you're seeing more of over the years.
Yeah.
But the ones you really enjoyed the most and the ones you found successful were not from the centers model? They were the individual and the consulting models?
Well, I was going to describe those first, because some of those things have been a lot of fun. And, you know, there was, for example, a problem that I worked on in the 1990s that involved a networking issue. And in this context, I'm talking about communications networks, where there was a theory question that this company wanted to resolve that involved what types of things you could potentially do from a statistical standpoint in doing management of routers and so forth within the core of the internet. So that was a fun problem, and it was perfect for a PhD student to work on, and the company supported that PhD student over the course of the career, and you know, we got some nice research things out of that. That's a nice example of this mode. But you know, there's also been fun things that I've worked on in which I or a group of other faculty have put together a proposal for an internal Stanford center and gotten some very interesting research opportunities out of that. In that setting, at least in my experience, I don't have as much direct industry contact as I would have in the one-to-one kinds of things.
Right.
And, but they're nevertheless very enjoyable. And I think that, you know, they've eventually given the company the kind of research return that it was looking for. I should also just say that, you know, in my experience, you know, finding a problem that's right for industry university collaboration is a bit tricky, in part because of the timescales that university people use in terms of thinking about when do you want to be able to deliver the outcome of a research project versus what industry people need. And you know, it's, I think, almost never going to be the case that if you have a collaboration that starts where there's a mismatch in those expectations, that it's going to be successful. So one of the things that is useful about these centers is it is the case, I think, when companies give these large dollar amounts, they're not really expecting that it's going to sort of impact their next quarterly report. They do understand from the outset that they're going to pay reviews every 6 months or every year, and that's going to determine, you know, ultimately the research direction that the projects that are supported go in. So, you know, this time constant mismatch is not something that you tend to see in that kind of environment. Also with the centers, you know, there's more staff support to go and solicit help from, to go solicit support from companies and so forth. So I think for a variety of different reasons, that model, at least in the Stanford environment, is becoming more and more common.
Okay, so let me come to Arko for a moment, and I'll pick on something he said because it ties into one of the other questions I have here as well, which is about these structures What is the mechanism by which? Is it a sponsored project? In India, you could have a CSR-based system through a center or directly to an individual professor. Sponsoring a PhD student is a commitment, whereas many projects may say that, get RAs, or I'm just going to sponsor for this year and we'll see how it goes after that, and so on and so forth. Structurally speaking, what are things, if you had to do it from scratch, how would you structure things so that both industry and academia could work together successfully? And yeah, feel free to comment on the thing he said about the quarterly reports versus the time scales and so on. And of course, if you want to comment on any of the earlier questions, please feel free to do so.
Thank you. First of all, I'm really glad that I'm here. Distinguished panelists, thank you. My take is I've done industry academia partnerships thrice in the country so far. One with IIT Bombay, one with IIT Delhi, and the other one with VIT Vellore. And in my experience, I think there are two major things that play a role. One is time to delivery, which plays a very, very important role. Anyone in the industry is not looking for the best answer in 5 years. They are looking for an answer that works in 3 months. And the game is, how does the partnership work that out so that in the longer term, industry can keep on doing its research, academia can keep on doing their research, improving the solution that they have possibly delivered already a version 1 of, rather than industry folks just waiting for a long, long period of time for something to appear. That's very, very critical for industry academia partnerships. The second thing that I've observed is...
So who needs to adjust? Is it industry or academia?
No, both need to adjust. Both need to adjust, and I've had a successful partnership with IIT Bombay on the same lines, where it was a one-on-one with a professor, and the professor understood the significance of a version 1 of the solution, and he was aware of the fact that it will not get you to the paper that he was looking for. Right. And so then it was on my part to then talk to the stakeholders and the clients to convince them that, hey, this will come to you in stages and not be a one-shot victory, right? So both sides have to accept what their challenges are, because oftentimes I have seen the exact reaction where academia typically goes like, oh, come on, you don't understand the criticality or the complexities of the stuff that we are working on. And industry is like, yeah, that doesn't make money. So that back and forth, if that can be addressed right at the outset when the MOUs are getting discussed and the ways of working are getting discussed, it works. The other one is assumptions. When we have a problem statement, it's a real life problem statement that is as is. And my experience is I've had conversations where I've gone back to a professor and they've been like, hey, Arko, but if we assume that this objective function is convex, then the results can work out and we can have a great result. And we're like, but professor, it is not convex. What do I do, right? I can't change the objective function because it'll help write a paper. So I think, and that mindset in academia, which is that, we go down to the simplest form of the problem and then build and build and build on top of it, and you have a sequence of papers on it. That possibly does not always work out because certain problems have constraints as they are, and we can't really function with that. And the last point I would like to make is regarding the customizable thing that's there, which is jargon, which is that we need stuff, and I don't work in how the big tech is like. I work for consulting, right? And my role prior to Bain was in McKinsey, and I was a front-end consultant where I had to deal with a lot of different sectors and CXOs. And therein, you cannot build one solution for one client, right? You need to have the ability to have your cutting-edge stuff, built in a manner that can get customized from client to client in the same sector. That is something that I always found challenging because typically academic problems used to be very, very well-defined problems that you go after, right? So that's where the customizable nature of things come about. And how do you set that up in a successful manner? Because at the end of the day, it's dollar values, right?
Right.
The more time you spend on customization, the more time you're losing in terms of costs and money. So how can you reduce that time while being able to say that it's cutting edge? That's really why we go after industry-academia partnerships.
All right. So let me go to Ashish Gupta now, and I'll ask you the really hard question, which is, we've talked a lot about measuring projects, what things have succeeded, the different structures that succeed. Let's talk about failure, right? The thing we don't like talking about. Why do projects fail? Do you have things in your experience where you were sure this thing would succeed? The gut feeling said yes, the data said yes, everything seemed good, but it didn't work out. Or the other way around. And I'll reflect the second part of this question to the other four panelists as well, is when do you know how do you know when to cut your losses, right? Are there projects which continued, which you wish you had cancelled at a certain point? When should things be shut down? I have more questions on that line, but.
No, thank you so much. You know, with your due permission, can I just elevate the level of my comments?
Sure.
And piece through all these things that have been already said.
Of course.
Okay. So, you know, over the years, at McKinsey earlier, then as amongst the early founders and trustees of Ashoka and at Plaksha, and then having run a 300 people team doing patent filing and things like those, including for a Google and a Microsoft over the years, I do have a good perspective on how this interaction works, right? Between academia on one side and the private sector or the business or industry on the other side. There are many, many things to be done, and especially from the Indian context, the problem is far exaggerated because of the basic ecosystem that all of you guys in the US are used to. It's sorely missing in the country. So lots of things to be done, but I was just trying to go through everything, and I've come down to three things that need to be at least taken care of for a successful, long-term, fruitful partnership between academia and industry, okay? So the first one is process. Just coming down to the process, I was talking to, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Yeah. So she was saying, and exactly to Professor Shroff's point, she was saying that they took 6 to 9 months to sign one MOU, right? And after the MOU is signed, what next? So the starting point of the relationship, of the partnership itself, is hugely inefficient and frustrating, at least for academics. Now, what is the root cause behind it? I don't know, but the process of initiating that first interaction and the first thing getting started. After that, you get a grant from either the private sector, from that industry, or from a government department. You get a grant to do work on a project. The grant is not dispersed for 2 years. Okay, what do you do then? Third, which also she was mentioning, and I think has been mentioned, what is the problem that we are trying to solve for? Why is that company coming to Ashoka or coming to Stanford? What problem do they want to solve? So the problem statement itself, or the structuring of the problem that is you want to solve through this project, who is taking ownership of this? So again, the process. And once you have come down to everything else is in place, the process of delivery, the interaction between the two sides, how should that happen? So I think this whole value chain is seriously broken, especially in India. So first thing needs to be fixed is the process part of it. The second is, we have talked about success, definition of success. Linked to that, the incentives. Now, I want to publish as a researcher, I want to publish a paper. And with all due respect, on a lighter note, there is a tyranny of content in the world right now. Just so much publications. Sometime back, 15 years back, we used to file some patents for IBM. And we did some research, 90% of IBM patents don't create value.
They sue us.
Huh?
They sue us because they have patents. Every year, love letter.
Okay, whatever.
Don't create value for whom, I think is what he's implying.
Yeah. Anyways, my point is that so much of these publications happen and patents are filed and so on. So from an academic perspective, filing the patent is the end thing. From a corporation's perspective, I want to get value out of that. So incentives. Now, academics, and I'm not much knowledgeable about this, but you would like to get 2, 3, 4 year long programs almost running, research programs, and you want to get it right 100%. Me as a corporate, you give me the 80% answer, and to his point and the other point, 3 months, I want to see ROI on that. So incentives, the alignment of incentives, short term versus long term, shareholder value creation versus academic excellence, right? How do you do that? And the last part I would say is culture. So all of these things relate to, because it is Mars and Venus. It is chalk and cheese. I'll give you one simple example. In our 10th board meeting at Ashoka, in 2011-ish time frame or something, or 2010 time frame. Everybody knows Pramath here, right? Yeah. So we were having this meeting, and I came in just corporate honcho, right? I said, we had the meeting. I started like saying, why isn't this done? Why isn't this done? Because in corporates, we are in a command and control situation, right? Where you as a senior executive, when you say something needs to get done, it needs to get done. After that meeting, Pramath took me to the side. He says, Ashish, this is not your corporate headquarters. Every person who is seated here, every professor who is seated here, every student who is seated here has an equal vote, have an equal right to say something. So the process of building consensus is extremely key. So the pace of execution in academic institutions will always be slower, because it's a very equal, from a hierarchy perspective, it's an intellectually equal environment. And that is the clash you would always see between academics and industry, corporate people. And culture will always have strategy for lunch and breakfast. So this interaction has to be such that both sides are, in some sense, like a marriage, right? You have to adjust, you have to compromise. But the problem happens is that the terms of reference, or the terms of engagement between the two sides are never well defined. It's always noisy, it's always fluffy, and so on. So if you look at everything, if you start with process, incentives, and culture, and I'm sure there is a fourth and there is a fifth, you need to put all these problems into that framework and then start solving for it.
So I'll come back to you, because I have some more questions to ask about the failure, but I want to go to Professor Shroff once and look at this and focus in a little bit more on the culture thing that he ended on. What's your opinion? Have you seen this, having been on both sides of the equation now? That do you see a real culture difference?
Well, there is a culture difference, and I was in the slightly better position because I was heading research. Now, research, we had hundreds of PhDs working for us. We had a large team. So we already research. So we have that problem between research and the rest of the business. That's our own internal problem, right? We know how to manage that or not manage it. So when we talk to academia, we are much more on their wavelength already. Because, we had the engineers there. Yeah, we come from there, and, we have engineers who will take a little seed and then build all the bells and whistles around it to actually go out and get delivered, deployed, and stably supported, right? They don't have to do that. The key motivation, let's come back to motivation now. Why do you go through all this mess, process, all this? Is anyone forcing you to collaborate? No. You do it only if you want to. See, the administrative academia wants money. I mean, every academic administrator in the world is essentially out there to fund his institution, whether it's overseas or here, that's a common thing. So the centers that Professor talked about, I mean, they are a funding mechanism. They may or may not result in collaboration. The government gives you money, and they give you money for this center. I've seen many centers funded by TCS, funded by other companies. They do nothing. They're only, and they write the quarterly reports. Somehow desperately writing a report, so you have to show something on both sides. Who's justifying this millions of dollars coming in? Unless there's something, the corporate board has to say, yes, money where it went, there was a report, right? So that's actually funding. Let's call it just support. It may or may not result in collaboration. What we're talking about is a little different. Collaboration, again, boils down to students. And the second thing is that collaboration requires understanding, as Ashish mentioned, of both sides, their times, constants, etc. And so both sides pretty much have to realize that students will be students, professors will be professors, and you're collaborating for a reason. And the primary motivation for that collaboration is talent. You want the intellectual capital of the professor, their brains applied to your problem, because I've found every time we've talked to any good professor, in spite of having lots of PhDs, when they looked at the problem, you ask Kurt Method to look at a problem in logistics, he'll come up with something which is completely different from what you were thinking. You're really looking for that. Around that, there are the students who will do something, they'll write the paper, etc. But you want the talent. Bottom motivation has to be talent. If there's no talent, there's no need for collaboration, fundamentally.
So let me, and I'll open it up to everyone, and we'll take a couple of questions as well. But again, I'll go back to the failure modes question. Are there things, and given the culture gaps and other things that were mentioned, and the incentive gaps as well, any stories or any anecdotes, especially on things where maybe you felt it had succeeded, but the other side felt it had failed, or vice versa? Or the earlier question that I asked is projects where you feel like you should have shut them down earlier, right? What are the signs that a collaboration is not working and you should stop it, right? One sign which Professor Shroff mentioned early on is if you have an MOU and nothing else. Like, sure, you can tear up that MOU. It's sort of a waste of space. But what comes to mind when I ask you to analyze the failures that you've encountered? You want to go?
I've had many failures. So I guess I have many stories of this type. But I'll highlight two themes which recur. And one theme is reorgs. Companies get reorganized and their priorities change. And I've learned that the first time anyone mentions a reorg, that's the right time to cut a collaboration. Because when someone says there's a reorganization happening, what they're saying is, it's not worth my effort to put my own political capital in the company behind sustaining this collaboration. And because companies are such a fast-moving, dynamic environment, there's so many things happen. Like you were describing your clients will change, their priorities will change. What I say is either this problem was not real enough to that other person on the other side, it was not important enough for the company. And once that starts happening, I've learned to sort of, at the first sign of a reorg, I'm not saying reorgs should not happen. At the first time that someone in industry says we have to change things in our collaboration because of a reorg, To me, that's a sign that maybe the problems were not that important to begin with, to this person or to the organization. And the one time where a failure happened because of me, where I thought it had succeeded, was a consulting engagement. Someone had asked us, but I was thinking of it as a research engagement. The money wasn't really that much. The problems were fascinating. There was a company which was building this very specialized piece of hardware called an associative memory. And they said, well, what else can we do with associative memory? We have a captive client in Cisco because they use these memories to do routing. What else could we do? Could you tell us like some other problems that we could potentially solve? And I worked very hard, way more than what I was being paid. And we actually came up with some beautiful ideas on how their associative memory could solve some leading problems in analytics and so on. And then I had a presentation, and the CEO was in the presentation. The CEO said, well, but you didn't analyze the business. You didn't tell us how we're going to make revenue. And I realized in some respect that was my fault, because when they told me that they want to understand what other use cases they are, I should have either realized that what they mean is not just use cases, but how we're going to make money, how we're going to price it, who's going to buy it. They also mean market research. And even if I didn't realize it, I should have asked enough questions. So that was one time when I thought it had succeeded, but later found out that the things were very different. And I think that has to come down with assumptions. But I do think but that was partly my fault. When it fails from the industry side, it's almost always has been reorganizations.
Let me add to that a little bit. I've been on the Scientific Advisory Committee for the National Mission on Cyber Physical Systems, which has spent 3,600 crores of our money and funded probably 300 startups and dished out grants of between 100 and 200 crores to many institutions, 25 institutions. This problem comes up again and again and again. I see the startups coming out of these institutions and they measure things on a technology readiness level. Technology readiness is not enough. If you're doing a startup business readiness, what is the problem and how are you going to get somebody else to take out money from their pocket and pay you? Even if it's defense. Defense also is not there to fund you. Defense is also God can buy from anywhere in the world, right? Today, a lot of those companies are now, because of all this rigor that we put into the process of having a BRM, etc., they are selling lots of their drones and anti-drone stuff to the defense, and all that is happening. A lot of it happened because of the war and stuff. But the point is that they have to start thinking, not the technology alone, but that doesn't necessarily apply to the, I mean, in your case, shouldn't have applied because you're a consulting professor. If you're a startup, I would say yes. Definitely think about the business, right?
It was a failure of assumptions. I should have examined the assumptions, and they should have.
But your CEO should have had somebody else do that, in my view.
Okay. Yeah, let's get some questions from around the room, and I see a couple of hands up, and Sandeep's grabbing the mic.
Fascinating discussion, and I'll address it to one of my two namesakes on the panel. I'm also Ashish, to Ashish Gupta. So you mentioned that you recounted that anecdote that 80% of IBM patents didn't create value. From my cursory understanding of the IP industry, some of them are defensive, right? You are never going to build a product on them, but you just keep them in your arsenal to counter in the case of a potential patent battle in the future, right? So I was just wondering.
Even big companies like the one you mentioned do the other side as well, go and sue others or threaten to sue others because of their huge patents that they have, okay? And they make money that way.
Is your question answered? I would love to hear your thoughts.
Sorry, so your question is, why do they do it if 80% of them are not...
I was saying, is that fair to say that, like, if it's just a reality that you do defensive patents, then maybe they're not completely worthless?
Listen, you possibly cannot have 20,000 defensive patents being filed every year, okay? All right, so the question is, my friend Sandeep has worked at IRL in IIT Delhi. Now it's moved to Bangalore, I guess, right? The IBM's research lab. So you should go to IBM, go to their research lab and find out how are their researchers incentivized. You file a patent, $10,000. Now, who is doing the quality check on those patents? And again, I have nothing against IBM. It's a great firm, okay? Great organization, absolutely leading edge. But in general, it comes down to incentive structures. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily bad. Maybe 80% don't create value, but the top 2% create disproportionate amount of value. And it's a law of large numbers in some sense. You just don't know how things might pan out, so you want to go in and block a particular area, right? So, and I'm not an expert in this area, but it must be making sense for shareholders to have this kind of a strategy.
The world is full of patent trolls and you have to defend, so you're right. In certain industries like biopharma, patents can make a lot of money, right? And design patents like Qualcomm's for CDMA is a one-off. People don't give those patents anymore. I mean, that happened once and they made literally billions and billions from every CDMA phone which was sold. But that doesn't happen anymore. People have realized that. So really, a lot of it, you're right, a lot of it is defensive now. A lot of it.
More questions?
Yeah, just a broader question, I guess, for India. So when we compare with the West, we find that the private sector investing in research is much lesser in India than, say, I mean, all of investment in research is less, but also in the private sector, vis-a-vis other countries, US, China, so on and so forth. This is for the people who are in the industry. What do you think is the reason for that? What do you attribute that to? And how do you see it evolving?
Sorry, just to sort of garnish that question a little bit. That balance is fairly badly skewed. So in the US, the balance of government-funded research versus industry-funded research is, I think, 1/3 to 2/3 in favor of the industry. Whereas in India, it is very much in the other direction and even more skewed, right? So just to sort of add on that, please.
So I think in the Indian context, centers, basis, collaboration models between industry and academia are lesser. It's mostly partnership driven. Someone knows a professor somewhere. That's how relationships start typically. And there's lesser of those existing partnerships that come in from the industry right now. So I think it's a function of that as well, and it's increasing. It's not that it has been stagnant. The amount of money coming in from the private sector has been increasing. I think it's also a function of the talent getting retained in the country. So what I mean by that is whenever we do some of these collaborative work, the students who end up working, if they do get incorporated within the industry system, it's very unlikely that they stay back in the country. So a lot of times what happens is that outflow of the person who was there, who did the work, kind of moves out to the West. And that I have seen as a challenge because that's where the partnerships kind of falter, because then it's again a restart of a conversation with new sets of students, because students play the major role in all of those collaborative works. So I think if there's a better retention of talent as well across the board, and lastly, it's also the kind of work that we do in India. I think you'll see that we have a massive growth of GCCs, which are Global Capability Centers. Every MNC is setting up a GCC in Gurgaon and in Hyderabad and in Bangalore. But the GCCs are more from the perspective of not the IP, but the implementation of the IP, right? So it's typically the coding work and all of that typically happens more in India. So as and when more of the MNCs in the private sector in India kind of start doing a lot of IP work in the Indian domain itself. The Indian centers of those companies, I would say that, the industry funding is going to increase as well. Those are my takes, at least.
There are two parts to your question, Sandeep. One is amount of industry research being funded, industry funding academia, and amount of industry themselves doing research. Both are low. But it all ultimately boils down to two things. One is from the industry funding academia, you increase talent, there will be more demand. Because you don't go to fund somebody if they are not as good as even your own people. They have to be better. Only then will you go and fund them, right? And get them on board. And second, to do that kind of work in India is a structural change which, as you was mentioning, is happening slowly. The Microsofts, Googles, etc. You look at Dr. Reddy's, look at the Bharat Biotech. They're doing research. They invented new vaccines. Things are happening, but the scale is not as big. So more research has to happen in industry, as well as the more talent has to be there in academia. We just can't suddenly become, but the country that has done it surprisingly well is China. I mean, they are really able to crack that, and I don't know exactly
so
how.
So let me poke you on that.
Yeah.
What is the reason? What caused that acceleration? Because the sort of structural mismatch that you're talking about, that it's happening there, we don't have a history of it here, so we need to do something to make it happen more.
There was a period in the 90s and 2000s where there was a significant, and I think the professors from the US can also answer. I think I did see many Chinese young academics move back to China.
So this is the 1,000 talent style stuff?
A lot of people were incentivized, given lots of grants, given great positions, etc. They suddenly boosted their entire academic ecosystem. And talent, once talent comes, then the 10 cents come and everything happens, right?
If I may just also add, in addition to everything that has been said, maybe again, McKinsey 3 points. See, the first is around the availability of risk capital, and which has significantly changed over the last, especially over the last 5-7 years, but over the last 10 years, 15 years, the emergence of VC money, VCs, now there are hundreds of venture capital firms. Sorry? It'll explode. It's exploding. It just continue, and with AI now, it's completely exploding, right, in India. So that whole notion of risk capital, venture capital, and so on, I think is one aspect. So hopefully, over time, we will see far more risk-taking happening, far more research happening, R&D happening, collaborations happening. Linked to that is in the organized corporate sector, not the startup sector, one has seen an intensification of competition. The economy is more freer, structures are freer, market structures are freer. Technology transfers are now happening real time in some sense, right? It's not technology, but a Hollywood movie getting released in India at the same time as in the US. I mean, who would have thought of that, right? So industry and strong incumbents have an incentive to deploy capital into R&D because even the markets are expecting them to do that. Look at what Jio has done, right? I mean, look at what Mukesh Ambani at Jio and what they're doing. I mean, they probably will be the first ones to take on OpenAI. Let's see, okay? So that pressure is coming, and this is the markets and the capital part of it. The second problem which we still have in India is we don't have enough tax incentives coming from the government for investing into R&D. There's only some amount of tax breaks you can get. So that has to be taken through the roof. And lastly, it again comes back to culture. We as a country, we had two problems till about 15, 20 years back. One, failure was anathema. If you failed, you go to Sand Hill Road, right, in California, in the Bay Area. If you fail, your next startup valuation goes up 10 times already. In India, if you fail, you won't even get a job. Correct? So that's cultural. And related to that is confidence that we have as a nation. Till 10 years back, if you said that the next Google will come out of India, everybody would have laughed at us. Today, this is a vibrant country. We have full of confidence. We have 800 million people below the age of 35. The next set of 10, 20 companies, global companies over the next 20 years might come out of India now. Right, so I think those are the three problems.
Often, you see, let's de-link funding from actual collaboration, right? There's a professor, Gaurav Rana at IIT Madras. His initial work 10 years ago on these mobile-based payments was actually the seed for UPI. That link is not traceable through grants and money, etc. But it's happening. And you see the kind of things which have happened in payments in India, nowhere else in the world, except perhaps China. Right? So things happen, but we don't trace it, we don't measure it, and so we feel, oh, there's not enough. It's happening, but it's slow.
Okay, any final comments or questions? And then we'll stop. Last two comments or questions, yeah, back there. I'll just grab this.
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful discussion. I'm not very sure if this is the right question to ask here, but when do you think India will have its own indigenous large language model competing ChatGPT, Gemini, DeepSeek, Llama? Yeah.
Look, no large language model in the world has a nation stamp on it, okay?
No,
There
but
is no
some
US
way-
model, there is no Chinese model, there is no European model. They are models by companies, and they are there for a business interest and to see where it's going. Now, when an Indian company decides to do that, and if they have the capacity, they'll see the market and decide on whether or not to do it. There are efforts like Bharat GPT which are interesting. In my view, they are there to give us a good feeling that there's an Indian model. It feels good, right?
No, you
It's a
think it
feel-good
has
model.
nothing to do with the country, or?
No, doesn't have anything to do with the country. It has newspapers talk about, and I'm open. I've talked to journalists. It's come in the paper also 2 or 3 times. I've mentioned this. It's not a country thing. It's a business thing, right? We do need our own models, and there is work happening within the defense and intelligence services at a much smaller level to build our own, but you're not going to hear about them. Okay, that's about it.
Okay, so I'll stop the discussion at this point. We are perilously close to our closing time of 4:15, and I do want to keep us in time. So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to all of our panelists. One of the things that I will also do is the discussions that happened during the panel, I'll put it on that little doc I shared with everyone. I'll make a nice little summary. Please feel free to edit it, and it'll be released to all of the students in here. All right? Thank you so much, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
The shuttle for today will leave at 4:45 from gate number 1.